Joining me now, I've got Megan Woods, the MP for Wigram, Labor stalwart. You've been in the party for a very long time. I'm trying
Yeah,
to
I've been
think,
an MP for
2011?
13 years. I've been the Member of Parliament for Wigram.
That's really impressive. They must absolutely love you there.
Well, my predecessor was the Member of Parliament for Wigram for 27 years, so I'm not even
Jim
halfway
Anderson?
there. Yeah, Jim Anderton, he
So
was here for 27 years. So um, I did some math on it the other day, and it's kind of like 40 odd years, two MPs in this electorate.
that's impressive. That's
Mm.
really impressive. And Jim's got, those are big shoes to step into. Jim's got
Really
a
big
hell of a
shoes.
legacy.
And also, of course, the weekend that's just been has been the 50th anniversary of Norm Kirk's death. And of course, Norman Kirk was the Member of Parliament for Sydenham, which is now Wigram. So there's some very big shoes tucked away in Wigram.
Yeah, well, you seem to be doing a really good job of it at the moment. You've been there for a while. People obviously enjoy what you're doing down there and see the value of what you're doing. You've been a minister as well as now in opposition. And in opposition, you're the spokesperson for climate change, energy, and resources, which to me feels like something that's all kind of connected, all sort of
Absolutely.
interacted. Do you get the impression that your opposition on the other side of the floor don't see it that way?
Oh, not at all. I don't think they see the energy and resources portfolio as a climate portfolio. I mean, I think one of the things that any government of whatever stripe has to realise that every minister has to be a climate minister now, but no more so than in the energy and resources portfolio. It's one of the critical levers that has to be pulled.
Um, I've got a quote here from the Prime Minister last week. And I'd love to get your feedback on this one because I know full well how stupid it sounds. When we don't have wind, rain, or sun, we need gas to rely on, not imported coal. We're taking urgent action to reverse Labour's reckless ban on oil and gas exploration so New Zealand can have abundant, affordable energy. I can't imagine something that takes nearly 20 years to get results is going to help us in the energy crisis we've got at the moment, but I'm kind of curious what your perspective is on this.
Well, I don't even know where to start. So let's start at the end with the affordable energy part of it. That if any government thinks that shipping in LNG is a way to deliver affordable energy, they really are not understanding what's going on. We're looking at between 2 and $300 a megawatt hour to produce electricity from LNG. It is an unaffordable form of energy. And of course, I don't think there's any political debate about the sun doesn't shine at night, and when it's cloudy, that the sun doesn't shine, and when it's a still day, there isn't wind. They are givens. But there are other ways to store energy. What we see at the moment in New Zealand, we store our energy in the form of fossil fuels, whether that is gas or whether that is coal. And we have to find ways to store renewably, whether that's using our hydro lakes differently, whether it's around grid scale batteries, about using geothermal in a more flexible way. There are a lot of opportunities that New Zealand has that will deliver on that affordable, secure, and abundant energy. But I can tell you, importing gas or restarting drilling is not the way to give New Zealanders that security of supply and the affordable energy into the future. This current government is obsessed about how much coal they're building and think they need to have a merit badge for the fact that, that gas is arguably around half the emissions. Well, I say it's 100% more the emissions than renewable forms of energy, and that's what we've got to be striving for.
It feels very much like the same kind of message we get from this government about a lot of things. It's very cherry picked with the information that they put out. Because gas might have less particulate emissions, but it has a lot more methane emissions than we see from something like coal, which was already our largest emission gas that we put out there because of the agriculture industry. How frustrating for you is it to have to deal with that kind of misinformation being put out there by this government on a really regular basis?
Look, I think one of the really important things, and I feel this really keenly and deeply. One of my jobs as the Labour spokesperson for climate change is to be talking to New Zealanders about the opportunities, and particularly the well-paid jobs that sit there if we do go through this renewable transition. That everybody knows that we are going to need gas in the system for a period of time. What we cannot do is keep exploring and planning to use it. We saw when Antonio Guterres was here just a week or so ago, he said, "Oh, I don't really care about you bringing back the exploration for oil and gas because it won't be used." That is not the fuel of the future. And if we want to give New Zealanders security around their futures and around their jobs and their income and their ability to look after their families, it is our responsibility to go through this transition to make sure that we are delivering forms of energy that can be delivered for New Zealanders. I actually think that renewable energy is one of New Zealand's strategic advantages in the 21st century. We've just got to go through the transition, and we've got to do it well, and we've got to do it in a way that doesn't leave people behind. And that's not just about economically leaving people behind, it's about having the conversation that takes everybody with us. And I think that's really important. And I think it is really important that we have the conversation about jobs and livelihoods, because it certainly isn't coal and gas that's going to deliver the security of jobs and livelihoods to people.
One of the things that I've noticed in some of my research is the best plan is going to be something that looks at multiple options like wind and solar and geothermal a little bit, and obviously hydro dams are a big part of that. There are something like 25 outstanding permits for building wind farms in the country at the moment, over half of which I believe the Labor government actually authorised, and they just haven't. The companies haven't put them up there. Do you know why they haven't started that work on building those?
So there are a couple of key reasons. One was the instability and uncertainty that the will they stay or will they go around Tiwai and what was happening with Rio Tinto. It's 14% of our electricity use down there. So actually, until there was a decision around that, a lot of people were holding off. One of the other things that I know that the current government has advice on it, I've seen it written down on a piece of paper given to the Minister of Energy, is that you actually have to be doing demand side measures as well. It's one thing to say we're going to consent a whole lot of renewable energy, but unless you're helping and partnering with businesses to stimulate that demand in things like the government investment in decarbonising industry, getting Fonterra off coal, getting New Zealand steel off coal, that's what will stimulate the demand to match the supply. It's not just to build it and they will come. You've actually got to do both things together. And governments need to be looking at both demand and supply side measures if we're going to do this transition in a way that doesn't cause undue chaos for people. We have a government that tells us that the emissions trading scheme is going to do this alone. Well, we'd have to shoot the cost of the ETS, a carbon credit, up to somewhere around $150, $200 a tonne overnight to get a lot of those business cases that Giddy was doing across the line. And I can tell New Zealanders what that would do to immediately overnight to their energy costs. We need to be doing this in a far more orderly and planned way.
Actually, what can the government do about those energy costs? We're seeing record profits come out of the gentailers at the moment, of the four big ones. People are obviously paying more for what they're using, and we're seeing those record profits come through. Is there something that the government could do to step in to help with that, bring the cost down? Because that obviously impacts people in a cost of living crisis. Is there a trick that's being missed essentially in that area?
So I think one of the really important messages to get through at the moment for people worried about their household power bills, this is not something they're going to see when they get their next power bill, because people are locked into longer term contracts. Where the pain is being felt is on the wholesale, on the spot market, where people are buying kind of at the time of use and what the cost is. And we've got a dry year coupled with less gas. So it really is around that industrial use where that pain is being felt at the moment. And it's the industrial users that hadn't bought long-term contracts, who hadn't hedged their their electricity contracts out there. I think there are a few things that government could do. One of which is storage. That a lot of what is driving the price is the simple economic idea of demand and supply, and there's scarcity. So I think one of the things in terms of making sure that we have got ways to store and get through a dry winter is critically important. We had a piece of work underway on that in the New Zealand Battery Project. The government was allergic to the idea of pumped hydro in Lake Onslow. Okay, they scrapped the work on that. That's their decision. They were elected. I don't think it was the right decision, but they threw the baby out with the bathwater. They got rid of all of the work around renewable storage. And I think that's work that they need to be really digging into now and getting underway, because it is storage and the ability to store that abundant energy that really will have an impact on price. The other thing is actually just other forms of generation coming in that isn't as volatile. So offshore wind, for example, is a lot more of a steady form of wind energy than onshore. But Simeon Brown's been leading the consenting regime for that that we'd got underway. That's been gathering dust on his desk. Really needs to dig into that, quietly granting offshore mining permits and overlapping zones with some of those where their onshore wind could go without doing that work and thinking really carefully about what is the best for New Zealand 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the track. What is going to give New Zealand the most value? But then we do need to continue to look at those markets as well. I think we are seeing a broken market in electricity. When we did our electricity price review, the recommendation was not to decouple the gentailers, their generation and their retail arms. That works off a little bit older now. So I'd always said that we were open to continually looking at that. So the EA is doing quite a lot of really good work around market making powers, but certainly if I was minister, I'd be looking what else we could do, because it does seem that we have a broken market there at the moment.
In terms of those ETS as well that you mentioned before, I've got a question from one of our viewers here. Um, it's a bit of a long one here going. Many farmers and consumers are becoming concerned about the number of farms that are being converted to pine trees for carbon credits, which is causing a reduction in available land for food production. It says it understands the need to curb emissions, but feel that some better solutions that permanently store carbon in soil through native forests and regenerative farming practices are available. Would Labor continue that scheme?
So, I mean, one of the debates that is really heating up, and it was starting to really get a steam before we went out of government, is this idea about whether we're talking about our net or our gross emissions. So when we're talking about net, we really are talking about the way in which we can sequester, and that is through forestry at the moment. We do need to be careful that we're not going too far, not only in terms of our productive land, but also that we keep producing carbon credits. So I think that's one of the things that the Climate Commission has had quite a lot to say on, in terms of we can't just continually basically print coupons to emit, which is the forestry sector of that. So we do have to make sure that that is working in lockstep with what we need to do around our emissions budgets as well. Um, but also there are other technologies here in Christchurch, in my electorate of Wigram actually. There's a company, Aspiring Materials, that has got some funding from the Breakthrough, which is the Gates Foundation, to look at Ovaltine, which is a rock, and the way in which that can sequester carbon. So there are other ways in which we can go about things. So we have to be looking at all those options, but we cannot continue to believe that we can just continue to plant trees, and that's our emissions dealt with, and that we can just continue as we are without actually cutting the pollution that we're causing. We cannot do that for many reasons for this country. And our prosperity is one of them, in terms of our ability to earn a living from that land as well.
See, the idea of planning for the future is a really interesting one as well. I noticed part of National's plans for climate control and climate change control is technology that hasn't been invented yet to
Mhm.
stop methane emissions from cows. Um, I'm kind of curious what your perspective on that is. I've heard of the possibility of something being done on a genetic level, something as simple as a nose plug for some cows changes their methane output. But to put that as a cornerstone for a climate change policy feels a little tenuous to me.
Yeah, hope and a prayer. The vaccine's always been 10 years away, um, just about the whole time that I've been involved in looking at these things. Look, without doubt, there are things that we can do to reduce emissions. There's different forms of pasture and different feed that we give our livestock. That the vaccine, there is work progressing on that. There is a range of things. I think one of the really interesting things to look at, if you look across the emissions across all of our dairy herds across the country, there's wild variation. There's not just a constant. So I think we do need to look how can we be doing best practice with the lowest forms of emissions. But we cannot kid ourselves that technology is going to solve all of this. We've got to work a little bit harder than that. And look, farmers know that. I speak to so many farmers who know that. They know that if they want to continue selling their products into high value markets, it's not just government policy that they need to be watching, but it's also in terms of those scope 3 emissions and the carbon or methane, the carbon equivalent that is in our food products that major retailers around the world are looking at. Fonterra is being driven, as you know, is really being driven because Nestle is making some pretty ambitious targets around what its ingredients need to look like. So this isn't just a matter of should New Zealand do this or not. It's New Zealand has to do it if we want to continue to be an exporting country and we want to sell our products into those premium markets. And let's not forget, our European Free Trade Agreement's got some pretty stringent environmental and climate clauses in there. And that if we want to continue to have access to that market that we work so hard to get that free trade agreement with, we can't become a laggard.
I was actually going to bring that up because it is a big part of that free trade agreement, and we're not looking to meet those requirements by 2030 at this stage with the changes that this government's brought in. Is that something that for you is a bit concerning? There's this big marker that's 6 years away, essentially, that we're not looking at meeting because of the changes that we've seen implemented in the last 10 months.
Look, absolutely. And each one of those changes is going to cost New Zealand because if we do not cut those emissions at home, we're going to have to go and pay other countries on their climate reduction journey in the form of buying international credits. And it is to the tune of billions and billions and billions of dollars. So when this government said that it didn't want corporate welfare in the form of the government investment of decarbonising industry, which was recycling the emissions trading scheme money into partnering with business to cut their emissions rather than paying them through their industrial allocations to continuing into the future, and we were getting marginal cost of abatement, so effectively a price of carbon of, I think it was around $19 a tonne for one of the first ones. Show me anywhere else in the world that you can go and buy a carbon credit that has any environmental integrity for $19 a tonne. And look, the EU has really thrown down the gauntlet. It's said to countries, if you can't meet your 2030 targets, you can come and purchase credits in the European ETS. Now, they're going to be expensive. They're going to be a couple of $100s. I think it's around €150, actually. I'd have to check that. But why would we as New Zealanders, rather than working with our industries here at home to decarbonise them, set ourselves up for our future economy and the jobs of the future, why would we go and pay other countries? Or why would we do what Switzerland's doing, which is currently paying to put electric buses on the road in Switzerland? We need to be concentrating as hard as we can on what we can cut here at home because that is New Zealanders' security.
Speaking of things that we do here at home, is the future more roads?
Look, we had done so much work to get Waka Kotahi or New Zealand Transport Authority to be just that, a transport authority, and putting funding not only into roads. Of course, we have to fund roads. I think we know that. But we also have to be funding those other mode shifts. We have to be funding public transport. We have to be funding mass rapid transit. We have to be funding walking and cycling. We need to be building our cities in ways that actually allows for people to get get around without jumping in their car. But when people are in cars, we also need those to be more decarbonised, and that's why if you're going to build more roads, at least you could keep the foot on the accelerator, to use an appropriate metaphor, around getting people into EVs. That what we're seeing is that we've just seen a crash in the uptake of EVs across New Zealand. Unsurprisingly, the messages that the government is giving is this isn't important. It's not only about the subsidy, it's about the leadership, and it's about the message that's been given to New Zealanders. So that's something that you can't just keep building roads and continue and just your whole vision is that they're going to be used in exactly the same way they were in the 20th century, when we've got to be planning for what comes in the decades that are left in the 21st century.
I did have to laugh actually. I saw a video that Simeon put out the other day trying to prove that he can drive, and I just thought that was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. He could
He,
barely see over the steering wheel.
he's going to be a very busy minister if he spends his time trying to debunk every mistruth that appears on social media about you. I don't think I would have got any work done if I'd spent my time challenging what the trolls were saying was or wasn't happening in my life.
Oh, it's always the case. I know exactly
Yeah.
what that's like. But just, ugh. One last question for you from another viewer. They'd like to know if Labor's going to get back into. Are you going to crack down a little bit more on sort of business waste and planned obsolescence in technology?
So we before we went out of government, that the work was underway around around going down the right to repair. We're seeing that in other jurisdictions. So Rachel Brooking, as Minister for the Environment, had done quite a bit of work, progressing work around that. I think that's absolutely critical in terms of our electronics. What we also need to be doing is making sure that we're recycling. When they do come to the end of life, there's a lot of critical minerals in particular that are in our electronics that we do need to make sure that we're recycling. But also when it comes to waste, I think we've got a huge opportunity that most of the studies that will show, even after 2040, 2050, when New Zealand doesn't have fossil gas production here in New Zealand, that we still will need about 25 petajoules of gas. There will be that residual need for it. But we have opportunities in biogases, and that is intimately linked to waste and how we manage that. Not only how you might reinvest a waste levy in terms of making sure that we do have those biogas facilities, but also municipal waste, rather than landfill being a methane giver, that actually you can use that gas as part of the decarbonisation journey. So I think waste is a critical component when we think about how it is that we tackle climate change. From the circular economy point of view, it certainly makes sense.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for joining me today. It is
My
really
pleasure.
appreciated. I said I learned heaps. I love doing these interviews because I learn something new every time I do them. They're absolutely brilliant.
It was a pleasure to come on. Thank you very much.